Hey everyone, welcome back to the Movie Reviewers 100. My name is Scott, also known as Cineram here on YouTube, and this week I am reviewing, of course, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. The new Marvel movies, the Marvel MCU, is basically like my Star Wars now. When I was obsessed with Star Wars back then when I was a kid, now it's all about the MCU for me. So naturally I go and see each one of these movies first chance I get. So I saw Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 on Saturday. It is, of course, once again directed by James Gunn, who also wrote the script. And we've got, of course, all the main characters from the original. Chris Pratt as Peter Quill. You've got Zoe Saldana as Gamora, Dave Bautista as Drax, Vin Diesel and Bradley Cooper doing the voices of Groot and Rocket. Of course, Groot is much smaller now. And a bunch of other people returning, such as Nebula, played by Gillan, which is the second movie in a row that I've watched with her. Last week she was in The Circle with Emma Watson and Tom Hanks. Michael Rooker. Michael Rooker is Yondu. He has a lot of screen time, actually, in this one. And it wasn't until I saw Michael Rooker and Sylvester Stallone, who plays another character in this movie, having a conversation early on in this movie that I realized, that's right, Michael Rooker, Sylvester Stallone, Cliffhanger. They were in Cliffhanger together. Stallone has really seemed to make it his business to work in current movies with a lot of his co-stars from previous movies. In this movie, they're kind of adversaries. I mean, kind of, not really, but it's funny as in Expendables 3, Stallone was working with Dolph Lundgren, Wesley Snipes, and Antonio Banderas. They were all on his team. And back in the 90s, and the 80s, they all played his adversaries, basically, in Rocky IV and Demolition Man and Assassins. I thought that was kind of funny, the way Stallone keeps looping back to other, some of his previous co-stars. And it happened again, you know, Cliffhanger. So anyway, what's the plot of this movie? I'm a little uncertain as to how much to actually talk about, because there are some sort of spoilerific things that I'd like to get into, but I don't want to give away too much. Let's say, a tip-off about who the villain of the movie is would be if there's a particular scene that might remind you of Man of Steel. There's a scene in which, in Man of Steel, General Zod, played by Michael Shannon, gives this sort of history lesson to Henry Cavill. Of course, Zod is the bad guy in that movie. And there's another history lesson also given in this movie, and I thought, this reminds me a lot of Man of Steel, and I should have taken that as a sign. Again, don't want to give away too much, so I'm not going to go into too much detail about that. But the person giving the history lesson turns out to be not a nice person. There was a couple of scenes where somebody basically gives Peter Quill, the main character, an idea about, something that he could do with the rest of his life, rather than just, bum around the galaxy, getting into scrapes with his friends. It gives him maybe sort of a higher mission. And I'm listening to him to describe what is going to be happening here, what could happen, and what Peter Quill could do. And there's a scene actually where, as part of a demonstration, Peter Quill gets lifted off of the ground by this sort of like weird energy tentacle that goes right through his chest but doesn't hurt him. It just lifts him up and his eyes change. And I'm thinking to myself, this isn't going to happen, okay? He's not going to do this stuff because he's going to hang out with his friends, I mean, it's just, he's got his team, he's got his friends, so he's not going to do this thing that this other character is proposing that he do. So that was, I was sort of like, the movie's kind of divided in half, basically. The team is split in half. You've got Peter Quill, and Gamora and Drax, and they're off doing one thing in one location, and then you've got Groot and Rocket, who are babysitting Nebula. Nebula, of course, was trying to kill Gamora, so they've got her sort of locked up. They're keeping an eye on her. And they've got their thing that they're doing. They run into some trouble as well. And it just seemed like the scenes involving Quill and his friends, basically, in his little half of the group, were kind of just like spinning wheels a little bit, because it just, I just knew that we were sort of like being kept from something. It was just like, where is this going exactly? I know there's going to be more revelations, and we're going to figure out what's happening here, what's really happening, rather than what we're being told. On the other hand, Groot and Rocket and those guys have to deal with Yondu. They've got to deal with the Ravagers that are looking for them, and so I found that stuff a lot more interesting. So it's sort of like half and half. There's like one half of the scenes I'm just like, okay, let's get this over with, and the other half I'm like really enjoying it a lot. There's also a scene later on where Yondu uses his arrow. Yondu, of course, has the magic arrow that like flies through the air and, you know, zips right through people when he whistles. And he uses it on a bunch of people in one scene. He, like, you know, slaughters just a huge number of people, and that kind of bothered me a little bit because he's supposed to be one of the heroes, actually. He's working with Rocket and Groot to, you know, get out of a bad situation. But then I remembered all those guys he killed, what they did earlier in the movie, and I'm just like, oh yeah, they kind of deserved it, because they caused a whole bunch of mayhem to begin with, you know, caused some deaths, you know, so they kind of deserved it. I was a little sort of iffy on some of the things that were happening. And in the end, basically there's this huge thing, this huge set piece involving lots of CGI garbage flying every which way, and it just gets to be kind of overwhelming. It's one of the few movies I actually saw in 3D. I don't go and see 3D movies a lot. I went to see the 3D movie basically because it was a convenient time. Me and this buddy I know, we went to see the movie, but we missed the 2D screening, and the 3D was starting like half an hour later. We didn't want to wait an hour and a half for the next 2D screening, so we just went to the 3D one. And, you know, it wasn't really something that I needed. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't like my favorite thing. The cool part was seeing the trailer for Valerian in 3D, because that was really good looking in 3D. Yeah. Guardians of the Galaxy, the first one, was a movie that I didn't really care for all that much when I first saw it. It was like, yeah, that was okay, and I wasn't really big on the ending, but I've actually seen it a few times since then, and I enjoy it more every time I see it. I find it funnier. The time that I enjoyed it most was just the very most recent time that I saw it. A couple months ago, I got the disc and watched it again, and it's a very, very enjoyable movie. And this one's not as enjoyable, but it's certainly not a terrible movie, not a bad movie. There's plenty to recommend about it. The special effects are just amazing. They're so great, and they're in every single scene. Every single scene has visual effects that just looks fantastic. So I modestly recommend this movie. I mean, if you're a Marvel fan, if you're a fan of all these movies, I would say, you know, don't skip it. You know, I mean, I definitely wouldn't disrecommend this movie. I just don't like it as much as some of the other ones. There's plenty to like about it, and I'm sure on subsequent viewings I'll maybe, you know, get more in line with the humor, I guess, or maybe that will be more memorable, because right now what sticks in my head after seeing it just one time is the big set pieces and all the, you know, just the cacophony of CGI elements that are just like clouding the screen, just like cluttering the screen at every single second of this big, huge, enormous, you know, apocalyptic climax. So yeah, I wasn't totally crazy about that. But not a disrecommendation, certainly. And of course, if you're fans of Marvel movies, you've probably already seen it at this point. But I'm not going to say, don't go and see it as terrible, because it's not. It's not terrible. It's just not as good as the previous one, because of a few little issues that I had with that. So anyway, quick review for you. I am not sure what's coming out this upcoming weekend, but I'm going to check out something new in the theater, and I will have another review for you next Tuesday. Thanks very much for tuning in. We've got the Facebook page link below if you'd like to leave us a comment there or like us, whatever. We're still getting visitors, despite the fact that we haven't posted new videos in a while. So I appreciate that very much. Hope you find these interesting, and I will see you next week. Later.